Our 2024-25 season previews continue on today with the Tampa Bay Lightning. And this is a really interesting team because the Lightning are at that point where you're asking yourself the questions of, is this team's window to win another Stanley Cup closed? That's the biggest question right now if you're a Tampa Bay Lightning fan, if you're a hockey fan in general. You got to admit that this team is not as good as they've been in previous years, especially since winning those 2 Stanley Cups. And this past offseason definitely was a season where, I don't know, some controversial moves happened. So let's start off where the fall kind of started, I guess. In 2021-22, I guess that's before the fall because they made the Cup Finals that year. But they went 51, 23, and 8 for 110 points. They were 8th in the NHL that year. Obviously, they beat Toronto, they beat Florida, they beat the Rangers. They go in, they lose to Colorado in 6. But you got to put it into perspective. They went to 2 straight Stanley Cup Finals and won 2 straight Stanley Cups. You see that picture up there? That's Andrei Vasilevsky holding the Stanley Cup right behind me. So obviously that's a big part of this channel's history, was covering those 2 Stanley Cup wins. Because when we started, the Lightning had won those 2 straight cups. But now we're at this certain point in their franchise where it's kind of a question what's really going to happen next for this overall roster. In 2022-23, they took a step backwards. They went 46, 30, and 6 for 98 points. They were 13th in the NHL this past year. They were a wild card then, and then they lost to Toronto in 6 games. They fought hard. They made it pretty close. There were a lot of people that look back at that series and say it was incredibly fluky. And, you can say all you want, but regardless, history proves it. Tampa did lose in the first round that year. This following year was a little bit harder of a year for them. They went 45, 29, and 8 for 98 points. They were 13th in the NHL. So they were still, at the same spot standings-wise. They were a wild card team. But they honestly got dominated by Florida in that first round series this past year. And yeah, it didn't look good. It looked ugly for them. They didn't look that good. Now, granted, 2 of those games were decided by overtime, if I'm correct. But overall, it was a rough series for the Lightning. So they head into this offseason and they make some very controversial moves, letting go of some players who have been here for a very long time. Your departures list: Steven Stamkos, Mikhail Sergachev, that's your big 2 right there. Calvin DeHaan, Hayden Fleury, Anthony Duclair, Tyler Mott, Tanner Jeannot, Matt Dumba, and Austin Watson are your departures. Honestly, I'd say besides Stamkos and Sergachev, a lot of those guys were depth players. I mean, the only notable guy that I see in there, I guess, is Duclair and Jeannot. Jeannot obviously was signed to that pretty brutal contract that the Lightning signed to him when they traded for him, which was already an overpay as it was. And obviously, Duclair was a deadline acquisition who actually looked solid in Tampa. I was a little surprised he didn't return to the Lightning. I was a little surprised about that. He went to the Islanders, I believe. So I would focus on the big 2, that being Sergachev and Stamkos. Yeah, you lose your captain. That's gotta blow. I mean, we knew that Victor Hedman was going to be the captain of Tampa most likely when Stamkos eventually left. I didn't think it'd be now, though. I didn't. I thought that Stamkos would be a Lightning for life, and just, especially as we head through this preseason, seeing him in a Predators jersey just looks so weird to me. It does. It's so strange to me. So that was something that really doesn't make sense. And then the Sergachev one, too, also makes lesser sense when you think about it, because they traded Sergachev to sign Stamkos. And now they have neither Sergachev or Stamkos. Now, granted, Sergachev has injury issues, didn't play that much last year. But again, you lose arguably your number 2 defenseman and your number 1 center. That's rough. That's rough. This team is very strong offensively, very top-heavy, but still, losing Stamkos really hurts this team. Now, the guys they brought in Jake Gensel, Cam Atkinson, Zegmas Girgensons, Jesse Olonen, Connor Geeky, Ryan McDonough, and Yanis Jerome-Moser. So going through the list, Gensel, good ad. I like that on the The left wing side, I think he's probably going to be a first liner immediately. Who am I kidding? He will be. Cam Atkinson, interesting one. Same with Gergensons. I feel like it's more with Atkinson than Gergensons, but they're going to give him like a lot of ice time from what I can tell. Unless if somebody else has a really good training camp, it's going to be Cam Atkinson most likely playing on that second line or the third line. But regardless, he's going to get ice time, unlike in Philadelphia where it was kind of like, he was on the fourth line kind of being rotated out and stuff. But again, just some depth that was added. I like Geeky. If he makes his team out of training camp, that's a pretty good add. I think that he could be solid for the Lightning. I don't know about McDonough. McDonough is a good add. It makes the top four to the defense look stronger. And then Moser, kind of a guy who was on Arizona, a little bit of a wild card. He was obviously, he's a good young defenseman, but he's yet to have a breakout season, I would say. But, overall, I would say this team probably did get worse. I don't know about a lot worse, but they definitely did get worse. So that is something that I look at when I see this team right now. So let's get into their projected lineup. These are per the Hockey News, not per me, so do not come at me. Thank you. So your top six, Jake Gensel, Braden Point, Nikita Kucherov is your first line. Second line, Brandon Hagel, Anthony Cirelli, and Connor Sheary as your second. That's a very strong top six. Very strong top six. So I think, again, like this Lightning team, when you look at like their offense, very top heavy. Very. That is a really good top six. I think that top six is going to score a lot. The majority of the offense is going to be relying on that top six. And that was shown last year. Last year when the Lightning were obviously, they were in a wild card spot for most of it. That was how it was. Like Kucherov scored a lot of their points. Then it was Stamkos and Point. And then it was kind of just, the abyss of depth. Like there wasn't a lot of depth there. There wasn't a lot of secondary scoring until they at least got like Duclair or Mott. But yeah, it definitely is a little bit concerning. But I like how this team has a really good first line, really good second line. That doesn't change. Bottom six, Mikey Eisemont, Nick Paul, and Cam Atkinson is your third line. Then you got Zegmas Girgensons, Luke Glendening, and Mitchell Sheffy as your fourth line. And then for some extra depth, you have Jesse Alonen, Connor Geeky, and Maxime Groshev. It's one hell of a line. So yeah, I think honestly, the depth is scarce. It is. You're not going to see a lot of secondary scoring from this team. You're really going to be relying on that power play, that top six. I definitely think that it's probably what you're going to be relying on here if you're Tampa right now. But again, like the bottom six, it's got some guys who can fight. It's got some guys who are grit. And maybe Cam Atkinson turns it around in Tampa. I don't know. He's on a minimum. He's on like a league minimum contract. So it wouldn't surprise me. But again, the forward core is a little bit scarce outside of that very top-heavy top six, which is most of the time it's how it goes. But with Tampa, it's very obvious. Your defense now, you have Hedman and Moser as your first pairing. Then you have McDonough and Chernak as your second pairing. And then you have Lilleberg and Nick Perbix as your third pairing. Then you have Darren Radish, I believe. Darren Radish as your extra defender. I always get the brothers mixed up. I really need to write down the D or the T whenever it's one of the two guys. But, So, again, it's definitely a D-core that it's been better, for sure. I mean, losing Sergachev hurts. It's rough to lose, like, your number two defender, for sure. But he was hurt the majority of last year. And they do bring in McDonough. And we'll see what Moser can do. If Moser really is playing along Hedman, I think he's going to have a good season. But overall, I just don't know if that D-core can sustain it. I'm sure it can. I like the top four, but I don't know. It's not one of the better D-cores in the league, or at this point it's not. But you obviously have Hedman in there, so he kind of does carry most of that. And then your goaltending, you have Andrei Vasilevsky and Jonas Johansson. Good tandem. Vasilevsky, we know what he can do. He's a great goaltender. If he can even go back to somewhat of his regular form, the Lightning are in pretty good shape. And then Johansson, backup, serviceable. He's not terrible. He hasn't been that bad in Tampa. So we'll see how that goes. Let's go take a look at the Hockey News' yearbook and see where they have the Lightning projected. They have them third in the Atlantic. Their cup odds are 23-1, and the biggest X factor is how long Stamkos' absence hangs over the roster might determine what kind of start the team gets off to, and they need a good start. If the results don't show up on the ice in the early going, it could derail the season quickly, but if they can push past the obvious storyline and show improvement, they'll remain in contention for a competitive Atlantic division. So again, yeah, Stamkos could really affect this team. The departure of Stamkos could hurt this team a lot. I think, again, like, you got to look at it like you're not just losing, like, one of your best players, one of, really solid guy on your forward core. You're losing your captain. You're losing most likely your best player in franchise history. I know there's a debate there, but he's up there for sure. So it's definitely going to be something that is... It's going to affect this team a little bit. Don't be surprised if they start off a little bit slow. But I think this is a team that, unless if the Atlantic has a changing of the guard, I think that they're probably going to make the playoffs in that wild card spot again, or maybe get in there in that third spot. We'll see what happens. But again, this is going to be one interesting year for the Wild. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Or the Lightning. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed, make sure to like, subscribe down below. I really appreciate it. We're going to finish these up, by the way. I know it's been a little bit slower to get these out. It's been, ever since, I would say, the beginning of this past year, things have been really busy for me with kind of getting videos out at right times and such. So I do apologize for that. But anyways, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Adios.